Hello everyone, I am Casey the Gamer, and it is time for another game review. Today we will be taking a look at another classic Capcom game, and yes, I do mean we. Today I am joined by the sensational Sheikykins, and we are taking a look at the survival horror juggernaut, Resident Evil, for the PlayStation. Resident Evil, or Biohazard as it's known in Japan, was released on March 22nd, 1996 in Japan, and on March 30th, 1996 in North America. I personally never played this one before this review. I remember watching my brother play bits and pieces of the second one. I also gave it a try myself, but the results were disastrous. My dad also had Resident Evil 3, but I felt a little too intimidated to try it at the time. I have played the Resident Evil 2 remake and a good chunk of the remake for this game, but most of my Resident Evil experience has been watching others play. Now, my co-host today has much more experience with the series than I do, to say the least.
Oh, that's me. Hi everybody, I'm Sheiky. I'm a massive Resident Evil fan, and I grew up on it. Oddly enough, Resident Evil 1 wasn't my first entry into the series, or my second. But when I did get into it, I was hooked. I'll admit I was a little shocked when Casey told me he hadn't properly played this before. I was really excited to hear he was going to be playing it, and even more excited when he asked me to join in his review of one of my all-time favorite games. Admittedly, I've played a lot more of the remake than the original. My copy was sold when I was a teenager, so it goes without saying I made a couple silly mistakes talking about things that didn't exist in the original when I was talking to Casey while he played this. But more on that later. I'm really excited to hear more of your thoughts on this game. But first, the story. You can play as either Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield for the story. Casey did a playthrough for both, and there are a few differences. For the sake of the review, we're going to focus on Jill's story and then talk about any differences in Chris's story afterwards.
In July 1998, a series of strange murders take place just outside Raccoon City. The STARS team of the Raccoon City Police Department are sent to investigate. All contact with Bravo team is lost, so Alpha team is sent after them. Alpha team consists of Jill Valentine, Chris Redfield, Barry Burton, Albert Wesker, and their pilot, Brad Vickers. The team discovers Bravo team's crashed helicopter and begin to investigate the surrounding area when they are attacked by a group of vicious dogs. Brad panics and takes off, stranding the remaining members of the team.
Is now a good time to remind you that he's affectionately known as Brad Chickenheart Vickers?
The team makes a run for the nearby mansion. Most of the team makes it inside safely. Chris Redfield seems to have gone missing. Wesker instructs Jill and Barry to go check one of the other rooms while he waits in the main hall in case Chris shows up. Jill and Barry head into the dining room and find a puddle of blood. They worry that it might be Chris's. Barry decides to examine it while Jill pushes forward. She heads into the next room and encounters the first zombie. Jill kills it, or so she thinks. Upon returning to Barry, the zombie had followed her into the other room. Thankfully, Barry puts it down once and for all.
They return to the main hall, and Wesker has disappeared now as well. Jill and Barry decide to split up and look for Wesker and Chris. Before going their separate ways, Barry gives Jill the lockpick for a very specific reason. Anyway, Jill and Barry split up, and Jill begins to encounter many more zombies, but manages to get through them just fine. She enters a room with a shotgun, and takes it, and heads into the previous room. The exit door is suddenly locked, and the ceiling begins to come down on her. Jill cries for help, and luckily, Barry heard her and gets the door open, and pulls her out before she's crushed. Jill thanks Barry, but then questions what he was doing over there. Barry simply replies that there was something he wanted to check, before saying they need to get back to looking for the others, and he takes off again. Jill continues making her way through the mansion, dealing with whatever zombies and puzzles it throws at her. She discovers an incredibly powerful weapon, the bazooka. Jill ventures further in and discovers a member of Bravo team, Richard, who is severely injured. Richard warns that he was injured by a poisonous snake and wishes that he had some serum. Jill rushes to find some and brings it back to Richard, just for him to die anyway. Jill does battle with the giant snake in the attic. It eventually retreats, and Jill exits the attic only to discover that she has been poisoned and passes out. Jill wakes up sometime later, having been saved and cured. It would seem that Barry saved her yet again.
Equipped with all the necessary items, Jill unlocks the way to head outside of the mansion and into the dormitory. While there, Jill encounters more zombies and even crazier monsters, such as monstrous sharks and a giant mutated plant called Plant 42, and even giant spiders. After dealing with the sharks and spiders and putting an end to Plant 42, Jill hears gunshots and runs to investigate, and runs into Wesker. Jill questions where he's been, and he claims to have had his reasons, referring to all the strange creatures. Wesker then says that they need to find a way out of here, and that there are plenty of locked rooms back in the mansion. There could be clues there. Jill decides to go back into the mansion and explore some more. Upon re-entering the mansion, Jill is greeted with a new threat, the reptilian menace, the Hunters.
We can just talk about how weird it is that their DNA was spliced with frog DNA, but they're still absolutely horrifying.
Jill explores more of the mansion, fighting off zombies and hunters along the way, also equipping herself with more weapons and items to progress. Jill comes face to face with the snake again, but this time she manages to kill it once and for all. After some more exploring, Jill finds the entrance to this underground cave and runs into Barry again. The two explore the cave together and encounter another member of Bravo Team, Enrico. Enrico reveals one of the Alpha Team members is a traitor before getting shot and killed by an unknown person. Barry stays behind and Jill goes off on her own again and encounters the biggest mutated spider of them all. Jill manages to defeat it and finds an elevator to take her topside. And then she finds another elevator to take her back down. But this time, it's down to a secret lab. Throughout the game, Jill has uncovered that all of the creatures she has faced has been because of a company called the Umbrella Corporation and their T-Virus.
The Umbrella Corporation was founded in 1968 under the name Umbrella Pharmaceuticals by James Marcus, Oswald Spencer, and Edward Ashford. In the 80s, it was expanded from pharmaceuticals to a larger corporation with its hands in many fields, such as cosmetics, medication, machinery, medical equipment, health foods, transportation, chemicals, and tourism. They dealt primarily in creating bioweapons for the military, in direct defiance to the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention. In an effort to draw attention away from their primary goal, the expansion into other, much more innocuous fields, including research for vaccines against the very viruses they were creating, began, also effectively beginning to create a monopoly on the market for, well, nearly everything. While many may believe that running the world economically was their goal, that wasn't it. They were dealing in eugenics. An incident in the 50s sparked Spencer's morbid fascination with experimenting with properties that could imbue humans with inhuman properties, effectively creating a new evolution in humanity. In 1966, he read about and became obsessed with the mythical Stairway of the Sunflower that would ultimately lead to the production of the progenitor virus. Bringing in a new face at the end of the 70s, William Burton, who had a real eye for detail, helped the T-Virus project take flight, in a manner of speaking. Originally created as a weapon for the military, Burton helped Marcus, who, at this point, had become rather independent of his co-founders due to some extenuating circumstances, develop it into a virus that could take over the host and turn them into a violent, cannibalistic monster. That virus would later go on to be used in other viruses in the future.
Upon exploring the lab, Jill discovers slides detailing the creatures, and it ends with a picture of some of the people involved. One of them being none other than Albert Wesker, still wearing his trademark sunglasses and everything. Jill delves further into the lab and runs into Barry again. The two head down an elevator only to be confronted by Wesker. Barry points a gun at Jill and Wesker tells him he did a fine job. Wesker also reveals that Barry's family will be in serious trouble if he doesn't do everything he wants him to. Wesker explains his plan and that basically he can't let this incident get out because it would look bad. He then orders Barry to go up on the ground and wait. Wesker plans to take Jill to see the tyrant and gets behind her to make her go ahead of him. Barry shows back up and knocks Wesker out.
Hey, Wesker, if you didn't go all Bond villain on her, maybe you would have gotten away with your master plan.
Jill and Barry head into the next room to deal with the tyrant and put an end to it once and for all. Barry tries to shut it down somehow, but the tyrant wakes up and breaks out of its container. It knocks Barry out and Jill battles the creature. Jill ends up stopping it, and her and Barry notice that Wesker is gone before making a run for the emergency elevator as a self-destruct alarm begins going off. Getting close to the exit of the lab, they get a message from Brad on the walkie-talkie saying to contact him if anyone is alive. The duo hears some monster noises, and Barry sends Jill up to the top to contact Brad while he stays behind to do something. Distract them? Kill them? I don't know. Regardless, Jill heads up to the top and fires off a flare, getting Brad's attention.
Brad begins flying over the mansion when the tyrant bursts through the roof and begins attacking Jill. Jill manages to hold the tyrant off long enough for Brad to drop down a rocket launcher. Jill grabs it and fires it at the tyrant, completely obliterating it. After that, Jill, Barry, and Brad, and potentially others, fly away from the exploding mansion.
In addition to there being 2 different characters to play as, there are also multiple endings. On my first playthrough, I didn't save Chris, so it was just Jill and Barry escaping. In order to save Chris or Jill in Chris's playthrough, you need to find 3 MO discs throughout the game and then use them in the 3 MO disc readers located in the lab. Once the code is decoded, Jill opens the door and talks to Chris behind another locked door. Jill goes and fights the tyrant and comes back as the alarm is going off and Chris's door is now open. Jill destroys the tyrant again on the roof once and for all, and the team flies off as the mansion explodes.
Chris's story is largely the same, with, of course, there being some differences. The story starts the same, with Alpha Team going in to investigate what happened to Bravo Team, and escaping the dogs by running into the mansion. This time, though, it's Barry that's gone missing. Chris, Jill, and Wesker hear a gunshot, and Chris goes to investigate, alone, while Jill and Wesker stay behind. Chris is attacked by the first zombie and makes his way back to the main hall, where both Jill and Wesker have gone missing. Chris finds Jill's gun on the ground and picks it up to arm himself. After fighting through some zombies, Chris meets Rebecca Chambers in one of the safe rooms. She's a member of Bravo Team. She helps Chris a few times on his adventure by playing the piano and mixing the V-Jolt for Chris.
After dealing with Plant 42, Chris encounters Wesker like Jill did. Chris asks where Jill is, and Wesker claims to have lost track of her when they were attacked. Chris goes back to the mansion, kills more stuff, does more exploring, and finally ends up unlocking the lab. Rebecca joins him to go confront Wesker. Wesker goes through his whole plan again, and then he shoots Rebecca. Wesker takes Chris into the next room to show off the tyrant. Chris laughs and calls Tyrant a failure. Wesker isn't pleased with that and activates the tyrant. The tyrant attacks Wesker, seemingly killing him before going after Chris. Chris fights the tyrant and stops it for now. Chris heads out, and it turns out that Rebecca is still alive, thanks to a bulletproof vest. Rebecca sets the mansion and lab to explode, while Chris goes to free Jill.
Chris heads up to the top to contact Brad so that they can get out of there, fights the tyrant again and blows him up, and the team flies away, once again, as the mansion blows up. Chris also has different endings, like depending on if you save Jill or not. Also, I guess screw Barry and Chris's storyline. After mentioning him at the beginning, they never confirm if he's alive or dead. But, to be fair, Rebecca never shows up in Jill's story. We all know it's canon to the story that all 4 of them survived the incident, so at least there's that.
Resident Evil is a third-person survival horror game. The game features fixed camera angles and tank controls, which can be a little frustrating at first. It took me a little bit to get used to them on my first playthrough, but once I did, it wasn't so bad. The basics for the gameplay are collecting weapons and items or keys in order to progress further into the mansion and its surrounding areas, all while killing monsters or running past them. There's also a fair amount of puzzle solving in order to obtain the items or weapons. Nothing too difficult to figure out, mostly just pushing things around in a certain way to activate switches or placing medallions or crests in the correct locations.
As stated previously, Resident Evil features 2 playable characters, Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield. The basic gameplay and puzzle solving between the 2 is pretty much the same, but there are some differences. Jill gets 8 inventory slots while Chris only gets 6, which makes item management for Chris a bit more of a pain. Jill also gets the lockpick for her special item, while Chris gets the lighter. Jill and Chris mostly get the same weapons, the starting pistol, knife, shotgun, and Colt Python. The 2 each get their own specific weapon. Jill gets a bazooka, which has a few different ammo types: explosive, fire, and acid. Chris gets a flamethrower, which is cool and all, but we feel the bazooka is overall better for its variety. Also, for obtaining the shotgun, Chris needs to swap it out with the broken shotgun. Unlike Jill, he doesn't get rescued from getting crushed.
So far, it sounds like Chris is getting the short end of the stick. Well, it doesn't stop there. Chris also can't play the piano, and he doesn't know how to mix the chemicals to make V-Jolt. I mean, I'll give you the piano thing, because that's hard, but mixing V-Jolt, just read the instructions, dude. In both cases, Chris needs help from his partner character, Rebecca Chambers. So finally, some positives for Chris. He is faster, and he has more health than Jill. Even with those two things going for him, I think Jill is the better and less frustrating option. Another aspect of Resident Evil that can be a pain if you're a spastic saver like I am, is the saving system. In order to save the game, you need to use an ink ribbon at a typewriter. There are a limited number of ink ribbons in the game, which to me, having limited saves is a scary thought. Which I guess that could be what they were going for. You just gotta play carefully and only save when you feel it's appropriate.
In addition to having limited saves, healing items and ammo for your weapons are limited. That's why it's important to choose when to fight or when to run away. You can practically run by almost any enemy in the game with the exception of bosses, which is a good thing, because you're kind of a sitting duck when you shoot because you can't move while you do it. The weapons are all pretty fun to use, but one of the coolest and most satisfying things is getting that perfect headshot with the shotgun, or seeing a zombie get blown to pieces by the bazooka.
Item management plays a big part in Resident Evil as well. You gotta know which items to take with you, and if it's a good idea to take healing or not, and hope you have enough spaces for any new items you find on your journey. One of the nice things is when you're done with a key, the game will tell you and let you discard it, freeing up an inventory slot. Any ammo pickups you find stack with any other in your inventory, as long as they're the same type of ammo, which is also nice. You can combine items as well, like the different herbs. You can combine multiple green herbs for a greater healing effect, or you can combine green herbs with red or blue herbs that offer additional effects as well as healing. The red herbs increase the amount you get healed by, and the blue herbs will cure you if you get poisoned. Another aspect of your inventory screen is examining certain items to open them up and obtain new items.
There's a fair amount of exploration in Resident Evil, as we alluded to earlier, with having to find the proper items to progress, and that all starts pretty much as soon as you enter the mansion. There's a couple story beats you gotta hit first, but then after that, you're free to begin exploring. So yeah, you make your way through collecting items and weapons, and fighting hordes of zombies and other crazy creatures like zombie dogs, a giant snake, mutated sharks, reptilian creatures called hunters, giant spiders, and finally, the tyrant at the end. First in an actual fight where you shoot him till he goes down. And then, you have to keep your distance on the rooftop while you wait for Brad to drop the rocket launcher so you can finish Tyrant off once and for all. And, big thank you to Brad for waiting until the last 25 seconds before the damn mansion explodes to drop the rocket launcher, as if there wasn't enough stress already.
The gameplay is a little dated by today's standards, just in general, but also compared to the Resident Evil games of today. There's unlimited saves, there's inventory expansions, and less awkward controls and angles in the new games. Dated as it may feel when compared to later and new games, the game itself is still a fun time, especially when you get used to the controls and how weapon combat works.
But the tank controls! We love the tank controls! Resident Evil features blocky, 3D polygonal characters and items, as well as pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera angles. For an early PlayStation game from 1996, the graphics aren't bad. But obviously, if you compare it to even the 2002 remake, and even the newer games, it doesn't hold a candle to them. But clearly that's not really fair. For an early PS1 game, it looks really good. And the dated graphics don't take away from how scary things can be, like the zombies and other creature designs are plenty creepy. And honestly, I think the backgrounds themselves still hold up pretty nicely.
So usually, sound effects and soundtrack get talked about separately. We're going to talk about them together, as well as the overall atmosphere of the game, because we feel like atmosphere is a big defining feature for a horror game. The sound effects for all the weapons and all that are great. They sound like you'd expect them to. Very satisfying. The creature sound effects definitely lead to being creeped out. Just the fact that you can hear them before you even see them. and sometimes you don't even know where they're going to pop out from before it's too late. That paired with just some of the random sound effects from the mansion itself, with all the creaks and stuff like that. Pair the sound effects with the game's soundtrack, and it can add up to some scares. I also feel like the game likes to mess with you. Sometimes there's no music and scary stuff is happening, and then sometimes you enter a room and some creepy music starts playing, and then nothing happens at all.
The game uses its sound effects and music, or lack of music, in certain areas to build a very creepy and uneasy atmosphere. Things could jump out at you at any time. As a result, the only places you feel safe are in the main hall and in the storage rooms. The save room/storage room music definitely eases some of the stress. I guess it's not as scary if you know the game really well. Resident Evil also features an epically cheesy live-action opening FMV. It's so good. It kind of sets the tone perfectly. Expect some scares with a side of cheese.
Chris Redfield. Jill Valentine. Barry Burton. Rebecca Chambers. Albert Wesker. Resident Evil.
Speaking of cheese, Resident Evil features some of the most legendary and meme-worthy voice acting and dialogue in video game history. It is still talked about all the time, even after all these years. I honestly think that the bad voice acting and dialogue adds to the charm of this game. There's so many good ones. Obviously the most iconic one being the Jill sandwich line, but there's so many other awkward lines and deliveries to leave you chuckling throughout your playthrough.
And Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you. That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Oh, Jill, this house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
So you're a slave of Umbrella now, along with these virus monsters.
Am I poisoned? Damn it, give me serum.
Tyrant. Chris? Stop it.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
As someone who has mostly experienced this game and franchise through watching other people play it, I gotta say that overall I really loved this game. It was tons of fun. It was a little frustrating for sure in some parts. Looking at you, Brad. But yeah, I had a blast with it. It was just so much fun finally getting to experience one of the most iconic horror games. Getting scared, even though I knew it was coming, blasting my way through hordes of zombies with various weapons, and getting to hear all of those classic lines for myself was a great time. I can't wait to give the original version of Part 2 a proper shot sometime soon.
As someone that grew up with the Resident Evil franchise, I think sometimes I envy people who had made it to adulthood without properly experiencing some of these iconic games. It's ingrained in my mind because it was such a big part of my childhood, but I would love to be able to fully experience something like this when I have a fully developed brain. There are so many intricacies I noticed but didn't recognize as a child, not to mention the beautifully calculated jump scares, plus the dialogue. I mean, come on, it's iconic. Thank you so much for having me on, Casey. I'm so glad to hear that you enjoyed the game and all of its facets.
Thank you all so much for watching. We greatly appreciate it. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And if you want to see more of me, you can catch me streaming all kinds of stuff over on my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/CaseyTheGamer91.
And if you'd like to see me stumble around on my own channel, I also stream. You can find me over at twitch.tv/Sheikykins.
We hope you have a wonderful day, and we hope to catch you next time. Peace out.